My name, as introduced, is Peter Dykhuis, and I'm joining you from Japuktuk in Mi'kma'ki in the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My presentation today is titled Weather Observations in 4 chapters, which will become evident. I am a son of an immigrant farmer. I was born in 1956 in London, Ontario. My parents were Dutch immigrants who came to Canada in 1948, 3 years after surviving 5 years of Nazi occupation in World War II. They were farmers in the rural north. My father's family, fortunately, had enough money to own their own farm and land. Note the formal family photograph and counterpointing work scene. I love my stern Calvinist grandfather, who I am named after, standing there with his hands on his hips, in his wooden shoes, staring at the camera, and through body language seems to say to the photographer, "Get on with it. We have work to do." And the horse seems to agree with the stern stare as well. My mom and dad were sponsored to Canada in 1948 to work on farms in southwestern Ontario for a 3-year contract and had obligations to meet before they could consider other options. Flat land above sea level was an attraction from a Dutch point of view, where my name is Dykhuis, which means house on the dike, which means land below sea level. After that, my father branched away from farming and became a welder, spending the rest of his working life in factories owned by General Motors, Fruhoff, and Westinghouse. But my mom and dad's feet were still rooted in the soil, and half of the backyard of our suburban bungalow in East End, London, Ontario, was turned into a vegetable garden. My dad would turn the soil and plant the garden. Honestly, like choosing the best manure, compost that we could gather in a trailer from farms from rural France. Like he would literally pitchfork through this stuff and say, "Yeah, this is good, that's not good, we take this." My dad would turn the soil and plant the garden, choosing the best manure that we could gather. My mom would cook and freeze its yield of yellow and green beans, Swiss chard, leek, and spinach that then provided food for the family year-round. These were crops that grew continually throughout the growing season, and they could harvest. The garden was a pain in the effing ass when I was 12 years old, because I often had to cap and snap bushels of beans before I could go swimming at the local public swimming pool. In tandem with his vegetable gardening skills, my dad also knew a lot about reading weather conditions. He would observe the clouds and other atmospheric conditions and was tuned into feeling the shifts in barometric pressure and what they meant. Much of it learned while growing up in Holland. I swore that he could smell the weather as it changed over the seasons, and it formed him about when to plant the garden and when to reap its cyclical harvests. It was fascinating, even though I just wanted to go to the swimming pool, almost magical and useful in predicting what would be good fishing days when on vacation. I took the picture that you're looking at now of a family friend, and we were like hauling in the pike from Grundy Lake. That's all I'm saying. During World War II, my father's family were part of the Dutch resistance and helped Allied aviators who were shot down by the Nazis and helped them to avoid capture as they worked their way back to safety behind friendly lines. I grew up with stories about aviation battles in the war, World War II, that fueled my fascination with the airplanes and flying. As indicated in the sketch, American B-17 pilot Edwin Pollock was harbored by my father's family. My dad passed away in 2016, but in the years prior to his death, he was in contact with an historian in Groningen who was tracking the story about Pollock's bomber that reportedly shot down Nazi fighters even as it was on its last legs in the air. In 1964, I'm dating myself here, when I was 8 years old, our family flew to the Netherlands for our parents' first visit back to home since leaving in 1948. My highlight was taking one of the early non-stop transatlantic flights in a DCA from KLM, from Montreal to Amsterdam. That too was magical. After moving to Toronto in 1978, I was fortunate to score a real job at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where I traveled around Canada, designing and installing their touring exhibitions, and spent a lot of time flying to host destinations. It was a dream, and I always had a window seat. Thanks to spare income from my job, I obtained my private pilot's license in 1982 from Central Airways and recreationally flew Cessna 172s out of Toronto Island, obtaining my night rating as well. And I'm sharing with you pics of Toronto circa 1985. It don't look like that now. I was a good pilot and soloed at 14 hours when the average was 20, attributing much of my skills to the hours of contour drawing in my first year of art school, which helped to develop eye-hand coordination, like blah, 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 doing the drawing, blah, 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 flying a plane. Also, as an exhibition designer and installer, I had a finely in-tuned sense of what was level when reading the spatial relationships between visual markers, whether from the sky or in a gallery. The most fascinating part of my pilot's training was familiarizing myself with map reading and meteorology and learning, much like my father, how to understand the atmospheric conditions that I was flying in. By the way, Most people can learn how to proficiently fly an airplane. But if you do not pay keen attention to mapping issues and the weather, you will die. Just saying. I do not have enough time to entertain you with tales of what a crazy ride it was landing on runway 33, coming over the trees of Gibraltar Point, managing the updrafts on a day with strong northwest winds. And again, Andrew, I hear everything you're saying about managing the winds and the updrafts and the turbulence. On the mechanical turbulence of a crosswind, the landing over the harbor heading for runway 26 was deadly in the shadow of the downtown Toronto towers on a hot, humid summer day with minimal lift produced from the moisture-laden air. It changed. In 1990, Jane, my lovely and talented spouse, scored a one-year teaching gig at NSCAD. She moved to Halifax with our 3-year-old daughter, and her mother as live-in nanny. I stayed back in Toronto, maintaining my job for an architectural designer and hanging on to my rent-controlled apartment in the Queen and Bathurst neighborhood. When Jane's job became tenure track, I joined my family in September 1991, have been a happy resident of Halifax ever since. We bought a modest house in Bedford, and we also had go figure, a second daughter. Unfortunately, there was no extra money for flying, but I have no regrets. I will never trade my second daughter for flying. She comes first. My studio practice in Toronto benefited from a larger space inside our apartment. From 1991 to 2001, I worked in a semi-heated 7-foot by 11-foot zone of a suburban Bedford garage, and due to time and space restrictions, had to rejig many things. I returned to an earlier strategy of working on gridded paintings assembled from multiple square panels. The image motifs, however, came from what still fascinated me about meteorology and weather patterns, but now I was playing with visuals that were available from digital sources on the internet. Living in Nova Scotia also radically changed how I previously experienced weather, since the patterns in southwestern Ontario had a certain predictability to them. In Halifax, I learned to appreciate the quip, "Don't like the weather? Wait 5 minutes." When I first heard it, I thought it was a joke, really a joke. But then I actually did experience all 4 seasons in one day, starting with an overnight snowfall on a May morning that melted away with hot summer sun in the evening. Then there is the famous month of June-uary, which, not unlike all 4 seasons in one day, is an extended period of time where both January and June are meshed together. Cold, cold, hot, cold. Also, the microclimates are mind-boggling. It could be raining on the Bedford Highway at sea level, Well, 5 centimeters of snow would have accumulated on our property just 200 feet up the hill. In the late 1990s, I began a series of studio works titled Radar Paintings. Fascinated with the ever-changing weather patterns, my fave go-to website for digital observation was Environment Canada, whose weather radar page recorded precipitation from Halifax Airport. All of the paintings were shaped by radar patterns that I harvested from the site that then became my challenge to represent with encaustic painting. In 2003, Halifax experienced the intensity of Hurricane Juan, a small but very sneaky hurricane at the end of September that rebooted to Category 2 strength after finding warm ocean waters off of Nova Scotia, and they were in the 28-degree range. It was like a turbocharged buzzsaw that cut through Nova Scotia, starting at Halifax, where honestly, 100,000 plus trees were uprooted or broken. I made 2 paintings that were both based on remote sensing. One was a graphic representation of the water temperatures, as you see here. So this is the 28-degree water zone that no one saw coming until they tracked it later. That 28 degrees rebooted one. And the other satellite image is of Juan itself. At that time, along with the radar paintings, I was most interested in the remote sensing technologies that permitted us to see what these storm systems looked like as an entity, as a thing. Of significance is the link of these imaging systems to military technologies. In effect, weather radar and satellite are domestic byproducts of weaponry used for warring purposes, a fact corroborated by the French theorist Paul Virilio. Then there's this other thing. These are things that you could see, but what are the things that you can't feel but sense? Barometric pressure maps have existed for many years in advance of digital technologies by linking together the contour of pressure readings from multiple ground stations. These contour maps represent the scaffolding of weather systems and are useful in predicting trends of weather development. Living beings cannot see barometric pressure, but can feel it, particularly as pressure rapidly changes. Ask anyone who suffers, unfortunately, from migraine headaches. Or watch your pets get agitated by approaching storms. Fascinated with representations of barometric pressure, I began a daily series in November of 2004 titled Pressure Today that continued for 125 days later. Another story to tell you when it ended. In it, I traced the daily continental pressure map from the Globe and Mail onto the lower right corner of business envelopes that I received during that time period. It became a map of my potentially pressureful personal relationships, captured through the postal system, combined with daily pressure tendencies of the natural environment. What was interesting here was that it mapped all my business relationships, whether it's banking, politics, and beyond. I continued with the barometric pressure maps on a number of following works where the isometric bars were superimposed onto collage remnants and ephemera from my life. Note the detail where my blood requisition sheet is beside the report from our veterinarian understanding of our cat. In the past decades, I've continued to work with other digital image sources of major storms and weather patterns, often manifested as circular shapes that hint at satellite and radar imagery. Note that the two presented pieces start with extrapolated hurricane imagery that is taken from specific named storms. In this case, Hurricane Chantal. The last few years continued my interest in shaping personal records with circular scope shapes, with that of the five-pointed star in a silhouette that also hinted at checkerboard patterns. I was curious about linking military technologies with the overwhelming presence of the star as an imperial signifier, particularly in the Trump era. Indeed, I was working on the following piece, presented here as a digital sketch, when Putin invaded Ukraine on 24 February 2021. Suddenly, the digital color-coded dark reds of intense weather systems appeared far too similar to the explosions in images of missile strikes in the Ukraine. My painting practice ground to a halt, and I am still working through the issues in my studio, particularly about the shared domestic and military technologies. When I first moved to Nova Scotia, experiencing the weather patterns was new and the folksy narratives were quaint. Then the stories accumulated about fisherfolk lost at sea due to bad storms. Weather kills. In 2003, Hurricane Juan was dangerous with devastating results. We lost 6 trees in our property and have since removed other trees that would have tumbled over and damaged our house, or worse, really worse, blocked our road, which would have affected access into our neighborhood by emergency vehicles. The blizzard of 2004, named White Wand, dumped 96 centimeters of snow on Halifax in 24 hours and was also a dangerous event as the city shut down for days on end. Other heavy snowfalls have ensured. This is at night, but it was a snowfall in 2015. And yes, that snow like well past our front door. And that is my shovel as high as it can go in the snowbank that I was trying to clear out. And those are other vehicles. And that is me, semi-triumphant, digging our way out. 2017. I had a snowblower, and I call this the hatching of a Eurus. Until 2 months ago, hurricanes were the greatest threats, with Dorian in 2019 and Fiona from the last year, the most consequential. The eye of Dorian passed over our house, and I personally witnessed its calm at the center of the storm as counterclockwise wind rotation approached from the southeast, then switched to the northwest as the eye wall departed to the north. Classic narrative, but I saw it happen from my front lawn. And with this picture, a hole in the swirling clouds with blue sky and a visible moon. All of the previous hurricanes that I've experienced in the past 32 years, came up the eastern seaboard of the US, resulting in the prevailing winds hitting Halifax from the southeast. But Fiona last September was a large and powerful storm that stayed out to sea after departing Bermuda and did not wind down due to the warmer waters than normal in the North Atlantic. Consequently, the hurricanes hit Halifax from the northwest, and one of our neighbor's trees unexpectedly blew over onto our house, which surprised us all since no one expected the winds from that direction. This is also why the damage in PEI and Cape Breton was so extensive, since the winds overwhelmed shores that had not previously experienced or been hardened by the typical hurricane that approached with winds from the southeast. Sunday, 28 May, changed my life when the sky filled with smoke from fires 10 kilometers away that were heading our way. Fortunately for us, but sad for others, the winds shifted and the fires burned to the north. On Tuesday, the winds were again 4 kilometers away, and we continued to be on evacuation notice. Everybody in the community knows people whose houses were burned to the ground and everything was lost. Fortunately, no one was killed. For the week, Jane and I were ready to leave with 30 minutes notice and conducted daily fire drills with our cat so that she would get into Jane's gym bag and not be left behind. Cat treats were the cue. Happy to share details. 3 weeks ago, rains of biblical proportions began. I've never recorded more than 45 millimeters at my weather station in previous storms, but documented 183 millimeters the first day with 50 mil the next day, for a total of 223. Our house is built on rock at the top of a hill, and we do not have a basement. We survived. Other houses downhill faced heartbreaking damage. The commercial district of Bedford was a flooded lake. The bucolic Sackville River, represented 100 years ago in paintings by Arthur Lismer, was a raging torrent that destroyed roads, buildings, and property in its way. It was terrifying. Climate change is real and affecting us all. But to end on a slightly lighter note, back to Hurricane Fiona, where the neighbor's tree politely fell on the vertical point of our patio fence, then landed on our roof, balancing there. There was only one damaged item, my roof-mounted weather station. I found the shattered bits on the front lawn, or the driveway. It was like all over the place. Hurricane Fiona killed my weather station. You can't script this stuff. It's kind of funny in a tragic way. So I bought a replacement unit, and I'm happy to be back to full weather observation for both the happy days and the scary ones, but am vigilant as we all should. Thank you.